Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Focus program, Stay Focused. I'm Pastor D.W. Tolbert, your host of the Focus program. I'm delighted and glad to have the opportunity once again to share with you, come into your homes and share with you another edition of the Focus program, Stay Focused. We are delighted to come to you tonight. We have a great program lined up today. We have an issue to discuss that is affecting all of us, and is a very serious issue that I'm sure that we'll find very, very informative tonight. Tonight, our special guest is Mr. Michael Pine. He is the coordinator of the Suicide Prevention Coalition in the Muskegon County, and he's going to share with us some things regarding this issue, this problem, and some might even call this epidemic of suicide. And so we're delighted to have you. Thank you, Mr. Pine, for coming and sharing with us today on our Focus program, and we're delighted to have you with us. Suicide. Wow.
Tough topic.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
And in the past 15 years, at least past 15 years, it's done nothing but increase. The numbers have increased and increased. So, and actually it's probably been going on for about the past 30 years, but a really steep increase in the last 15.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. My goodness. You've got your hands full, I know.
Yes.
And we really appreciate people like you in the community who work at this issue. It's affecting all of us. The community, the church, the schools, the courts, everybody is affected by it.
And I have to say, I mean, I'm here talking to you right now, but there's a lot of people involved in the community. The Suicide Prevention Coalition probably has 30 people that are involved. Then there's a death review team that collects the data for the Suicide Prevention Coalition.
Okay.
And there's 15 to 17 people who are involved in that. And when you start getting into instructors of various classes, courses, and other outreach that we're doing, there's probably at least 100 people who are actively involved. And then, of course, community health providers and partners, church groups, a little bit of everybody. So there's quite a few people who are working in the community. Right. Trying.
Yeah, good. You know, this kind of work, I'm sure it takes a unique kind of person, a gifted person, a person who God has touched them in a certain way that enables them to do this kind of work as you do. What is it that brought you into this this type of work and ministry?
Well, I've been involved in social work for a little over 30 years now. I say it chose me. I didn't really choose it. I was doing something completely different in the early days. And I started to work at Pine Rest Hospital about 33 years ago. And I've worked for a few organizations since, right?
Okay.
So I've been a social worker for a while. And about 5 years ago, somebody asked if I wanted to chair the Suicide Prevention Coalition. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. We'll see if we can make a difference there. And I took that role on.
Okay.
And I think really what happened was as I started to learn and study and look at the information and the data that's out there, it's hard not to be challenged by that and say, okay, we need to do some serious work here.
Right.
And whatever has been going on for the past 20 years has obviously not been working.
Okay.
Because the rates continue to increase. So I think on a certain level, I took that as a personal challenge and then when I saw the numbers for Muskegon County, it was very alarming relative to the state and the nation, right?
Okay.
We can talk about that a little bit more too if you'd like, but I think I looked at it as a unique challenge. It's such a trauma, not just to that individual who maybe dies by suicide and their family. Of course it's traumatizing to them, but it's traumatizing to a community. It's traumatizing to a nation, really. When you look at these numbers, this is a nationwide problem.
Right.
So I looked at it as a challenge to say, okay, in this community, in our community, is there something that can be done to change these numbers? And if so, what is it? Okay. Now I'm 5 years in, and I will say for the first time in those 5 years, I feel like there's hope.
Okay.
I feel like we can turn a corner here, and we're looking at some things that can really make a difference. Okay. That's the first time I felt that way in a while. So I think it just kind of spoke to, the challenge spoke to me, and just seeing the degree of the trauma that it produces. Mm-hmm. And then it's a vicious cycle. Yeah. It's like, can we actually do something to break it? And I think we can. Okay. So we can talk about that in more detail, too.
Okay. Well, good.
You want to hear about Muskegon County in particular?
Yeah, I think so. I think our viewers would like to know what's going on here in our own community, and kind of examine that a little bit, if you would, please.
I think I'll start larger, and I'll narrow it down for you, and ask me questions, as we go. What I do know is, and what we know as a nation, is that over 44,000 people a year die by suicide in America. Okay. That's more than die by breast cancer. That's a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Now, we hear about breast cancer, right? I say all the time, on my street, I got people that have pink garbage cans for breast cancer awareness. I have football players who play in pink uniform, right? We hear about breast cancer, and we should. Mm-hmm. We should be taking care of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that we do. But we don't hear about suicide. Yeah. And that's stigma. Spiritual beliefs, there's a lot of reasons we don't hear about it, but 44,000 more people die by suicide than by breast cancer. Wow. Now, those 44,000, they are the ones that the medical examiner can definitively say this was a suicide. They left a note, they've been depressed, they took an overdose, they did something to die that was obviously caused by themselves, right? Okay. But what we know are that there's 5 or 6 times more probably that were suicides that the medical examiner couldn't call a suicide. So in other words, that 44,000, that jumps to at least 220,000 a year.
Is that right?
That makes it the 3rd leading cause of death in America. Wow. That is a huge number. So when we bring that back home and we start to look at it, we see in America it's about 12 per 100,000. Maybe we're close to 13 per 100,000. Okay. And here in Muskegon County, we're higher than that. Wow. Last year we saw a decrease, which I was glad about. But the year before that, we had a 105% increase. So I figured we had nowhere to go but down, right? Yeah. We're going to see a decrease now. So we start to see these numbers in Muskegon County, and we're about 45, depending on the year, 45 to 65% higher than the state and the nation here in Muskegon County. This was the challenge, right? Yeah. This is too high. Yeah. This can't keep going this way. So our numbers are already high. We know that those are the ones that the medical examiner can say died by suicide. Mm-hmm. And we obviously need to do something. Mm-hmm. We need to change things. Mm-hmm. So those are kind of the numbers and the statistics. Now, I will say, too, that the other unnerving things, and I don't want to dwell too much on the statistics and the numbers, but I think it's important for people to hear it. Mm-hmm. I don't want to necessarily scare people with these numbers, but at the same time, it is important we're having the discussion. So in November of 2010, just this past November, the Center for Disease Control out of Atlanta let the nation know that suicide is the #1 cause of death for 10 to 14-year-olds. Oh. We're talking middle schoolers. Right. These are children. Certainly middle-aged men, predominantly white men, middle-aged white men in America die by suicide at a very high rate. The other thing that we're starting to see in the past few months, or few years, I should say, is that young Latinas, young Hispanic females, teenagers, #1 cause of death. Second leading cause of death for African American young people in America. Now, when I started at Pine Rest 30-some years ago, you often would hear, well, suicide, it's not prevalent in the African American community, for example, right? And that was true, especially amongst African American women, older women. But it's now the second leading cause of death of African American young people in the nation. Now, that's not so much the case here in Muskegon, but we also don't want that to be the case here in Muskegon. We got to get in front of the problem. And then when you talk about the Asian community, also for young people, #1 leading cause of death. So while it impacts older individuals a little bit more people are dying, we do see a rate of death in young people that we shouldn't be seeing, right? We have to do work on. So Muskegon County, we have a high rate of suicide. And we're seeing it in young people, and we're seeing it across cultures. So then it begs the question, everybody always usually will ask the question, well, why? You know, whether that's a suicide that's occurred in your family, that question is almost always going to be there. Why? Why did this person die? Or when we look at it as a community, the question is still why?
Yeah.
And I've been pondering that for quite a while, and I don't know that I necessarily have the answers, but recently a survey was done in Muskegon County called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they surveyed across cultures and age groups and incomes, and this adverse childhood experience thing about in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, Kaiser Permanente in California took this survey of questions about adverse childhood experiences.
Okay.
Things that maybe impacted you as a child. And that could be maybe a parent was in prison, maybe there was divorce in the household, so traumatic events. And what they learned from interviewing 17,000 people and following them is the more of these traumatic experiences that occurred in your youth, the more you answered yes to, of 10 questions, the more likely you were to have poor health outcomes. Cholesterol problems, diabetes, obesity, including then, of course, mental health problems and suicide. So the more adverse childhood experiences you've had, the more poor your health outcomes are going to be. Well, we know Muskegon County ranks now maybe second to last, third to last in the state counties for health.
Right.
So it would stand to reason when we did this survey then of adverse childhood experiences, we have a lot of trauma in the community. So there's trauma. So the answer to the question why is probably going to be we have a lot of trauma here, right?
Trauma.
In all our communities.
Yeah.
The good news is we know that, we can look at that and we can say, now we can do something about that. Because you happen to have experienced trauma as a young person doesn't mean that you can't have a healthy, happy life where you are achieving things and life is improving. It's when that's hidden or you don't understand where it's coming from that makes it even harder. But so adverse childhood experiences, that survey has been very, very helpful, I think, in terms of moving things forward with trauma-informed care. So the question is no longer what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you, right? When you're talking to somebody. It's not about what's wrong with you. So we look at the trauma in the community, we look at the issues around that, and then we have to look at stigma. We have to look at why we don't want to talk about these things. Quite often, obviously, if somebody's dying by suicide, there's a mental health concern almost every single time. Not all of them, but almost every single time you're going to have a mental health concern. Depression, anxiety, psychoses, things that can occur. And what we know is quite often people want to blame the individual for a mental health problem. But these things are not a personal weakness or a personality flaw. This is a brain not working correctly, right? Mental health concerns are typically going to be a brain that's not working. So if it's your kidneys, your lungs, all of that, that's all good. The second your brain doesn't work right and you fall into a depression, oftentimes people want to say that that's a personal weakness or there's a personality flaw in there or snap out of it. Or, It doesn't always work that way. But we're learning that now and we're trying to get the word out there. Again, these are illnesses that impact people and then lead to problems, hopelessness and depression and ultimately suicide. There can be other factors, of course, too. So that's sort of big picture country and big picture Muskegon in many ways. So that's usually what I talk to people first about.
So, you know, what I hear you saying is that we're just in a different world today. The world has changed. And there are pressures, anxieties, and expectations that did not exist, say, in previous generations. You know, 2 or 3 generations ago when suicide levels were not as high as they are today.
Right.
And So how do you get your arms around a problem like that?
I think on a personal level and on a there's a few things. We'll start on the personal level. You meet somebody, or you have somebody in your family, or you're struggling. The important thing to do is be able to talk to that person about what's happening, right? Hey, I've noticed you're not feeling well. It seems like you're down, seems like you're depressed. I'm seeing these things in you. Sometimes when people feel this way, when they feel depressed or down, they think about taking their own life. Are you thinking that way? We have to ask the question. And a lot of times people are scared of that question, to ask that question.
Right.
But and we think if we ask that question, we're going to make that person go, hey, I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to die by suicide, right? We're never planting that seed in people. We're not giving people the idea. To talk to them one-on-one, we're not planting this seed in their head. Human beings want to believe that. It's kind of a strange thing. If you're depressed and you're down or you're not feeling right, and I come to you and say, I've noticed these things in you, and I'm concerned about you, and we have a conversation about the fact that you are feeling down, and then I say to you, are you thinking about suicide? You're not going to go, I hadn't thought of that, thank you, and then go off and die. That's just not going to happen, but we believe that could happen. If you're one-on-one, those are always an expression of concern, and you're worried for the person, and almost every time that's going to be met with relief. Now, they may not be honest with you the first time you ask that question, but you may have to ask it a second time, and I would encourage people to do that.
Relief from the point that someone understands.
Somebody's asking me,
okay,
and they're hopefully being non-judgmental while they're doing it, right? They're accepting me.
Right.
They're not going to hold it against me. They're not going to use guilt on me, right? Somebody's talking to me. They're going to, this is how we save lives. So on that personal level, this is how we help people. In terms of the community, the greater community, is we have to recognize that there's trauma. And anybody can take this ACEs survey, Adverse Childhood Experiences, MuskegonACEs.org. I should know these things a little bit better. Or if you go online and you Google Adverse Childhood Experiences, there's 10 questions there. Answer those 10 questions. See where your trauma level is at for yourself or your community or your church.
Okay.
What is our trauma level? And now that we understand that a little better, now we can start to understand why we have poor health outcomes, including mental health, physical health and mental health. And we can start to work on that trauma that we experienced. So we as a community are starting to move forward and work on those things, such as there are groups out there that are working on trauma-informed care. The Muskegon Intermediate School District is fully involved in working on these things. Lots of school districts are involved. There's grant programs that are coming to town. Our community health providers are getting a better understanding of what trauma-informed care means. Around the country, there are local governments, smaller governments that work on trauma-informed communities, just to say, look, we have to better understand these traumas, and then we can start to work on those traumas, and we can have better health outcomes. All health outcomes, including decreasing suicide. So I say, while I might be involved with the Suicide Prevention Coalition, it's the people in the community that are doing the trauma work and the trauma-informed care work and trying to reduce trauma towards young people, and then working on the trauma that we've experienced. Maybe we're less young, and the trauma we've experienced to improve our health outcomes. Those are the people that I say are doing the heavy lifting, and they're the ones who are going to reduce the suicides. So when you hear trauma-informed care, when you hear about resilience building, when you hear about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs they call it, that should get your attention, and you should be learning those things, and those things will help a community. So that's how I think we're going to get our arms around that problem there. I probably have a million other ideas too, but you can understand how somebody, let's just take diabetes, forget mental health concerns or depression or those types of things. We'll take cholesterol, any number of things. Smoking, people who smoke and have a cholesterol problem. When you look at those things, if you can work on healthy, happy early on, and you can mitigate trauma, of course, you've got a healthier person all the way around. We got to work on that, and I think we're getting to that point. With what we now understand, I think we're getting to that point. Let's hope.
Now, from the church perspective, is there, because we are experiencing this in the church as well.
Yeah.
You know, we're dealing with it on different levels here in the church. Boy, I got so many questions.
Sorry. There's a lot.
Yeah. Someone comes to me
Yep.
and says, I attempted.
Mm-hmm.
I attempted unsuccessfully,
Right.
but I attempted suicide.
Let's talk about a few things. This is what I would suggest for everybody in the community, and most certainly those people who are serving other people, you serving the work that you're doing. I would highly recommend that people minimally take a class called QPR.
I was going to ask about that too. That's
Question,
good.
Persuade,
That's good.
Refer. Now that's about an hour-long class. Health West offers them free of charge. We'll come to you. You know, if you've got a group of people, we do them in our building. We'll go anywhere. And we have new instructors that are coming on board, and we can go out there and teach that. And that's going to teach you the warning signs and the skills. QPR is question, ask the question. How do you persuade that person to choose life? And then referring them to help.
Okay.
It's a real simple course. And then mental health first aid, this is an 8-hour course, goes into much more detail about mental illnesses, mental health. It's not just suicide specific, but it helps to decrease that apprehension we may feel about helping somebody who might be struggling with a problem. And it also teaches you suicide prevention skills.
Okay.
And it puts into perspective what are mental health concerns, say maybe relative to typical adolescent development. If you're learning about the youth version, we have an adult version. We have one for the military and family of military. So my suggestion would be, one, go and learn those skills. If you don't or haven't learned those skills and somebody comes to you and they're talking about depression, they're talking about suicide, don't be afraid to talk to them about it, right?
Okay.
And again, this is not a personality flaw. This is not a personal weakness.
Okay.
Ask them the question. Are they safe today? Are they thinking about killing themselves now in the future? If they say yes, you want to follow up with, do you have a plan? Do you have the means, right? Do you have a gun? Have you stockpiled pills? And the more questions they answer yes to in there, the more dire the situation.
Okay.
That doesn't, even if they answer yes to one, you're going to take it seriously. You want to get them to help. Medical doctor, their medical doc, the emergency room, and you want to go with them to the extent you can. Phone numbers, though. There's a phone number, 1-800-273-8255.
Okay.
273-8255. Call that. Answers here in West Michigan. Somebody's going to talk to you. Young people can text 741-741. I say young people because I don't text like young people. Those resources are very, very important. So I would say when they come to you, and then if you feel like, wow, I don't know how to handle this, then find somebody who maybe can, right? Don't run away from it, and don't go, well, I don't know if I heard what I think I heard, or it's...
Okay.
Second you get that gut feeling that something's not right, we got to ask the question. And you're stepping into somebody else's suffering, and you're offering help, and more often than not, that's going to be met with relief, and they're going to be glad that you did it.
Okay.
And the best we can do is ask those questions. Figure out, are you suicidal? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Will you go with me to get help? You know, will you promise me to get help if you're not going to go with me now? We got to work these things out.
Right.
And to recognize that these things, almost always that person is not thinking clearly.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, it does help. It does help. It gives us a little framework on what to do and when facing those kinds of situations. And then, we're almost out of time, but before we do go, I did have one final question on, when a person who has committed or attempted to commit suicide, how do we interact with that person? Is there a guideline on what some do's and don'ts? Some don't say this. Do say this. I mean, no. There's a stigma there too.
That's an individual who is likely suffering, been suffering, they're at a much greater risk of dying by suicide again with that attempt. Right. If they have not received services or gone to get help, they're at a much greater risk of dying. Okay. And I think you treat that like you would treat any other kind of illness. If somebody came to you and said, I got kidney disease, I got to go for dialysis, I don't like it, I don't want to go, you're probably, how would you work with that person, right? Yeah. The same is true. They happen to have an illness that maybe it impacts the brain, so it's a little bit different. But an illness is an illness, and they have what is potentially a life-threatening illness, and you want to treat all illness the same. Okay. This happens to be more than likely a mental illness. Sure, they could be looking at losing freedom, or maybe their house is in foreclosure, or maybe a relationship has ended. And we want to say that there's one thing causing this problem, but it's probably a lot of things piling up. Yeah. And not the least of which now is causing their brain not to work right and think clearly, and they're depressed, right? So this is still a mental health concern. This isn't a personality flaw or a personal weakness. Something's not right there, and you're working with somebody with an illness, just like treat it like any other illness. And it's potentially life-threatening, and you are going to save a life probably.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much. We're just about out of time, and I tell you, it goes by so quickly. And but we thank you for your time that you spent with us, and just giving us a little glimpse into this issue. I really enjoy what Jesus said. He said, "Take my yoke upon me and learn of me, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light." And we try to persuade folk to cast their cares upon the Lord and try to trust in God in those issues that we can't handle on our own, and as well as promote, well-being and support our brothers and sisters, regardless of what they're going through. I appreciate you injecting that issue about the class that's going on, and it's available.
Come and take a class.
And I think we'll try to pursue that.
That'd be great.
And that sounds really good, because it's good to know. It's like a fire extinguisher, It's good to have one just in case.
That's right.
But then you have to know how to use it.
Right.
So we will delve into that.
I appreciate it.
See if we can get a group over there, and maybe get someone to come over here, and
we'll come here
as well. Yeah,
whatever's easiest.
Because as I mentioned, we're dealing with it,
right.
And it's an issue that we have to face. This is the reason why I got interested in you, and
I appreciate it.
Contacted you to see if we could come on the show and share some insight. So thank you again, Mr. Michael Pine, the coordinator of the suicide prevention in our county. And we will put the information on our screen to share with our viewers how to get in touch with him and his office if you need help, if you need guidance, if you need some kind of intervention in your life or the life of someone you love. Thank you so much. We're out of time, not out of word. But we want to say, as we prepare to leave, always remember and never forget, when you get with Jesus, you're going up. God bless you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.